Hi there, I'm Cindy Linden, and this is the Cook Along Podcast Quick Bite. You might ask me why on earth I would do a podcast about cooking dry pasta. After all, you just boil it up and drain it and throw some sauce on it, right? The hardest part is waiting for the water to boil. So let's start there. When I'm cooking dry pasta, I no longer wait for water to boil. That is the only thing that makes cooking pasta take a long time. It also steams up your kitchen, uses a ton of water you end up having to throw out. I've stopped doing that. Here's how to cook pasta without the long wait for the water to boil. You put your dry pasta in a large, deep frying pan. Then you add enough cold water to the pan just to cover the top of the pasta so that it's not sticking up. And then you add salt and turn the burner under the pan onto high so that the water will boil. You stir it a few times while you're waiting for it to boil. Shortly after it starts to boil, you're going to take one noodle out and cut it or bite it to test for how done it is. You can't use the timer. You can't use the package directions because those are for putting pasta into already boiling water, which you've waited 15 minutes for to come to a boil. This will come to a boil much faster. Just keep testing it until the pasta seems to be as done as you really like it. It gets done much faster this way than you're going to expect. Now you think, oh, isn't it going to clump together? It's going to stick. No, because the water is cold when you start, so there's nothing sticky about the pasta when you put those two things together. This works with any shaped pasta except it shouldn't be filled pasta like tortellini or ravioli, and it shouldn't be frozen pasta or refrigerated pasta. This only works on dry pasta. I haven't done it with lasagna noodles. I don't know whether it would work or not, but everything else, this is a great way to cook and finish pasta in less than half the time. So that's the first thing. You almost always want to add salt to pasta while it's cooking. Now, if you're boiling it the traditional way, you're going to wait and add the salt after the water comes to a boil because the salt itself can be kind of hard on your pan if you don't do that. But if you're doing it the way I just told you, you can put it in at the beginning. You want about a tablespoon of salt to every pound of pasta. That seems like a lot, but it's only going to absorb some of that, not all of it. After you put your pasta in the water or after you put your water on the pasta, you're going to stir it. If you're doing it in the frying pan, like I just said, make sure to pat it back down so that it's not sticking up. And you're going to want to stir it a few minutes in as well so that it's not sticking to the bottom of the pan. Some other things. Don't add oil to the water. You might have heard at some point in your life that adding oil to the pasta water keeps the pasta from sticking together. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't help at all because the pasta is below the oil, and what oil there is going to get onto the pasta when you dump it into a colander and keep the sauce from sticking to the noodles. Don't put oil in the water. It's useless. It wastes oil, and it doesn't help your pasta. Second thing is don't rinse the pasta. Unless you're going to use it in a cold salad, you don't want to rinse off the excess starch that's on there because it helps whatever sauce you're going to make thicken and stick to the pasta. So don't rinse it. Don't leave it in the water after you cook it. If you're especially doing it in a big pot, the traditional way, don't leave it to sit there. It's done. You turn off the timer. You leave it to sit there till you're ready for it. Don't do that because it's just going to continue cooking and it's going to be mush by the time you get it into your sauce. If you're going to do the pasta the way I do it, when your pasta is done, the water should be mostly boiled away. If not, you'll have to strain it in a colander. But if you put in the right amount of water, you're going to find how lucky it is that you cooked it the way you did because the water mostly evaporates. When it's mostly gone, the pasta is probably also done. But what's left behind is this kind of gooey, starchy, messy stuff that's kind of white. And it's the remainder of the water and the starch, and that is good stuff. That's really great for your sauce. It makes your sauces smoother and silkier, and you want to leave that on the pasta. If you're cooking it in the traditional way, before you dump your pasta out into a colander, take at least a cup of the pasta water, scoop it out with a measuring cup or a ladle or whatever, and set it aside to add to your sauce if it needs it. Now, that's a whole different thing because the starch to water distribution in a big pot is way different than what we've boiled down in the frying pan, which is sort of almost a sauce in and of itself because it's so thick, but it doesn't have any flavor. but it will aid every sauce, any sauce you want to add. By the way, speaking of sauce, if you're going to put a nice sauce on the pasta and not just butter or oil, you might look for die-cut pasta. It'll specify that on the package, and it's kind of a newish thing in this country in mass distribution dry pasta boxes. Die-cut means it was forced through a kind of a press that will shape the pasta that had rough edges. So it leaves your pasta with rough edges as well. They're not really all that discernible when you're holding a piece in your hand, except if you look at one that's identical in shape, that's not die-cut, you'll be able to tell the difference. The die-cut ones are just a little thicker, and they have rough edges. And of course, that means that when you put it in sauce, they hold on to the sauce better than the smooth kind, where the sauce can just sort of slide off. And more about sauce, it's best to add the pasta to the sauce, not the sauce to the pasta. For instance, if you're cooking your pasta the traditional way, and you're making, let's say, an Alfredo sauce on a different burner, you don't want to dump the pasta into a colander and throw away all the water except for your special reserved cup, and then put it in a bowl and add the sauce to it. What you want to do is undercook the pasta by just a minute or two, and then add the pasta to the sauce that you've been making. Now, that means, of course, that the pan you make the sauce in has to be big enough to accommodate the pasta when it's done. So think about that when you pick which saucepan to make your sauce in. The final cooking for that pasta is going to happen in the sauce, which means, of course, that it's no longer absorbing water. It's now absorbing sauce to make it softer. So, of course, that's going to help with the flavor, right? Now, if you're not going to sauce the pasta and you've dumped it all into a colander from any kind of cooking method, and this does apply to refrigerated or frozen pasta or lasagna, you may need to add just a little tiny drip of olive oil to the pasta and stir it up. Don't do very much, just enough to keep it from sticking together. Because pasta, once it's cooked, that starch is going to adhere to itself, to each other, and the oil will help keep it from doing that. But you don't want so much oil that it's going to repel the sauce when you finally get it into the sauce. So really, it's best to do that only if you're going to have it cold anyway, for a pasta salad or something. Now, what if you want something just a little different, a little exotic, and what you have is plain boxed dry pasta? You still have some options. Your first one could be, instead of boiling it in water, you're going to boil it in broth. A chicken broth, a vegetable broth, a beef broth. Now, obviously, your pasta is absorbing that. That's how it plumps up. It's absorbing whatever you cook it in. So cooking it in broth means that the starch that's left behind is flavored and that your noodles absorb the flavor of the broth. Option number 2, what if you boiled it in wine? Does that sound crazy? It isn't. It's kind of a fun thing to do. You get a cheap bottle of Cabernet Merlot. There's no point at all in spending a ton of money on it. Get it as cheap as you can get it. And you boil the pasta in the wine. That does 2 things. It gives you the flavor of the wine within the pasta, so that once the pasta's drained, it still has that little reminiscence of wine. And it makes the pasta this kind of deep purple-red color, which is very fun and very exotic on your plate. So it's a dye as well as a flavor. Option number 3. Let's say you're making a cream sauce. Let's say you're making an Alfredo or something that you want on the pasta. Start with a big frying pan and saute whatever vegetables you want in there. Onions, garlic, whatever you're going to have in there. Meat even, if you're going to use some chicken or something in it. Saute those things. And then add milk. And warm everything up together, and when it's just starting to get steamy but not boiling, throw in your dry pasta. And the pasta will absorb the milk while giving away its starch to the milk, which makes the milk into a sauce all by itself. It won't have a lot of flavor, though, until you add the cheese to it at the end. So you're either making a mac and cheese this way, or you're making an Alfredo sauce this way, and you throw in the cheese at the end after it's thickened some. Now, here's the only thing. 2 things about cooking it in milk. It will take longer because you do not want the milk to boil. So you're just going to have sort of hot milk that doesn't boil, and you're going to have to stir it, and you're going to have to keep an eye on it, because if it boils, it's going to start to burn. Milk is protein-based, and proteins burn at a very low temperature, so you got to be careful not to burn the milk. That will not help you at all in your flavor profile. So it takes longer, and you have to watch it more carefully than pasta boiling in water. But once you have this starchy, milky mass of goo, you can just add your cheese to it and your sauce is done. I mean, you need some salt and pepper, obviously. But because of that starch in there, and because the pasta has already absorbed some milk, you may find that you like your Alfredo a little bit better this way. One more experiment to try. If you're looking for something a little bit exotic and a little bit different that doesn't require any different procedures, it just takes a little prerequisite step, you might try toasting your pasta. If you think about the dishes that you've had, maybe some especially that have just cheese and oil or pepper on them, you might imagine what it would be like if you had toasty pasta instead of just plain pasta. So there'd be a little bit of an extra golden brownish flavor. And you can totally do that with the easiest possible step, which is just toasting your pasta before you cook it the regular way. So you can do that in an oven, spread your pasta of any shape out on a large cookie sheet and bake it for 10 to 15 minutes at 350. Or if you want just spots of brown instead of a uniform color, heat up a dry pan of any sort, stainless steel or cast iron or whatever. Cast iron might have a little seasoning left on it that will add to the pasta's flavor. Throw the pasta in there and stir it around until you get some brown spots that you like. Try to get it on as many sides as possible and use that. The flavor won't be quite as intense, but it's still going to be pretty and noticeable. So let's summarize this podcast's proper pasta prep pointers. First, consider cooking it in a frying pan instead of using a big pasta pot. And by the way, you can find the actual details of how to do that step by step on the website, which is thecookalongpodcast.com. Go to the blogs and look for You Don't Know How to Cook Pasta, or just type pasta in the search bar when you first get to the page. Then, 1 tablespoon of salt to 1 pound of pasta. Stir after putting the pasta and water together. Don't oil the water. Don't rinse the pasta. Don't leave the pasta in the water after it's done cooking. Don't throw the pasta water out until you've reserved at least a cup. Undercook the pasta by 1 to 2 minutes and add the pasta to the sauce, not the sauce to the pasta. Add olive oil to drained pasta only if it's going to sit without sauce for a while. And then, the options we talked about today: boil in broth, boil in wine, boil in milk, and consider toasting it for something just a little different. Look for ways to use that pasta on the Cook Along Podcast website. Dry pasta is such a simple thing, and we use it all the time, and most of us love it in whatever form it shows up on our plate. But it doesn't have to be the same every time. It can be a creative process. It can make a cook who doesn't know how to do anything except cook pasta look like they're a chef because they've done something fancy and unusual to this simple food that we all love so much. That's my 2 bits on pasta. Look for ways to use that pasta on the Cook Along Podcast website. Remember, there's a new recipe episode of the Cook Along Podcast every other week, and a new quick bite with kitchen ideas in it the weeks in between. Tell your friends you listen to the Cook Along Podcast. Have fun with your new pasta ideas. And until next time, happy cooking.